Anyways, she was explaining this whole wheat cat thing. And very huge. I'm not great on social media. I tell people I'm really more of a horse and buggy guy. It's an awesome way to communicate because you've got absolutely everything in the whole world there. So. Well, good to meet you. Have some questions ready for me and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Good to meet you. I've been in Calgary a few times before, and when I was this high, until I was this high, I used to live here. So, 6 years. I was 4 years old when we came, and 10 when we left. So, those are some of my earlier years. What do you think? That was the third of my childhood. The rest of my life has been in Saskatchewan. I was surprised how many people we had out in Edmonton. And they caused a problem. They all cleaned out my donation sheets. I hope they fill them out. It's a good problem to have. So. I did, yeah. I was in Saskatoon yesterday morning for my home. So I left there earlier. I kissed my wife on the forehead and my daughter. We have a 2-year-old. She got scared at night and decided she had to sleep with mom and dad. So in the morning, the two of them went side by side, both like this. So I kissed them both on the forehead. They weren't up. And then I
Put it up.
Here.
You go here now.
I'm down south of Lethbridge. My
This
brother
and
lives
then you go here.
So I'm down. It's a common name. Yeah. We had actually a list of 10 names. I had a list of 10 names. We have a 2-year-old. And I had 10 names. Rachel was one of the 10. My wife had one name. So it was much simpler. And so we ended up with Isabel. Well, stick around. Well, you know what? We all know that's just got to do. We didn't think about it. No, it's awesome. I've happily showed up in all these events there. Yeah. Now, this is going to be a bit of a problem for the video people because I don't like to stand still. This is something my mother actually noted before I was born. My dad could see the little legs moving, and my mom said they never stopped for when they started somewhere about, I don't know, 5-6 months in. So I have a hard time standing still. I need to burn off some energy. And I drove in today from Edmonton. I had a great series of 3 meetings up there, and glad to come down here. You know, Edmonton, they don't do the weather as well as they do it here in Calgary. And I've known that for years. I actually, when I was about this high, we moved to Calgary in 1978. And we went back to Saskatchewan in 1984. So about a third of my childhood was spent in the city here. Now, it affected me in some ways. It affected my older brother in other ways. And I can let you decide if it was good or bad. He's a dyed-in-the-wool Calgary Stampeders fan. To this day. I, meanwhile, cheer for those evil people in green. However, I'm told about a third of Calgarians do anyway, so it's not quite such an unpopular problem here. So anyways, it's good to be back in Calgary. I've been here for a couple of events, for fundraising, for other stuff. And it's a strange leadership race in that the rules sort of encourage people to go campaign in Quebec and Atlantic Canada, and to stay away from Alberta until the end of the campaign. And I can explain later on why the rules actually encourage that because of membership sales, values and ridings and so forth. But when you're from Saskatchewan, you're so natural to just zip over into Calgary. I've got a brother in Lethbridge I've seen tomorrow as a campaign. So it has seemed strange to spend more of the last few months in Quebec and Halifax and St. John's than in Calgary and Edmonton. But I'm really glad to be here. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a member of Parliament for the Saskatoon area, since 2004. First elected when the parties all got united, we founded, however you want to say it, and we got together to boot out Paul Martin. We didn't quite do it in '04, but I remember that night in 2006, January of 2006, where we actually broke through something that 2 years earlier had seemed to be impossible and defeated the Liberals. Now, I also remember our night of election for that strong, stable, national majority government in 2011. And I also remember thinking, you know, I never thought I'd live in a country again where Trudeau was Prime Minister. Because if you remember, 78 to 84 had some bad economic years for Canada, particularly Calgary, and some of those things had to do with the previous Mr. Trudeau. So when memories die hard, even for people who were 6, 7, 8 years old at the time. But I'm glad to be here. But I have to say, you know, if you had asked me 12 months ago, even though I've been a long-time Conservative member of Parliament, if I would be running for the Conservative Party leadership, I probably would have told you, no, not going to do it, not ever. I had a couple of people actually approach me in April. It's funny, when you're one of the few MPs in the caucus that speaks passable French, people automatically think you're leadership material. I don't know if that quite qualifies, but that's the way this country kind of is. They sort of narrow down the list. And I had told them, nope, I know how much work it is. I know the hours away from home. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go there. But then last year at our party's convention in Vancouver, I started to begin to think about changing my mind. And I did it for one basic reason. And some of you may disagree with this, but that's fine. This explains where I started to get to where I am today. Our party had a resolution there about getting rid of the traditional definition of marriage. Some people were saying, you know, we're not going to vote on it again, let's get rid of it. But this is one thing which wasn't told to a lot of people at the convention. In most of the places across the country where the resolution had been voted on by party members, it had been defeated. It went down 60% opposed, 40% in favor. In the online poll that had been done, it got defeated in Saskatchewan, it got beat in conventions in all over places, particularly in Ontario. Ontario is much more socially conservative than people realize. And so there had to be a little bit of bending of the rules to get it on there. And we had a debate on the issue, and I frankly, for people who have never agreed with me on this issue, I totally respect them. I like consistency. If you've always been consistency on this issue, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Let's debate it. But the problem for me there, and what began to get me to think about why maybe I should get involved in running for the leadership, was watching some of my very good friends, people who still are, flip-flop on the issue literally overnight. Because in politics, you very quickly realize there's two types of politicians. There's people who are like compasses. They have a direction that they're pointed. They're going in that direction, whatever it is. They've got principles. It's a lodestar. They're going that way. And you know what? I respect people like that, even though I disagree with them. And you know, there are some of the other candidates in the race. I will never support Michael Chong's carbon tax, ever, 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 ever. But the guy has consistently argued it. He believes it. He has believed it for years. I think he's 100% wrong in so many ways, but he's honest, he's sincere about it. I respect him for it. Okay? He will never, ever. Michael's the most honest guy I've ever met. He's never going to lie to you. And that's one of the problems he always has in politics. He tells the truth even when he's wrong. Okay? Great guy. But I respect him for it. And there's other guys in the race that are like that too. But I really have a problem with the other type of politician. Almost every member of the Liberal Party fits into this category. They're weather vanes. The wind blows one way, they're like this. The wind blows the other way, they're like that. Look, one thing you learn very quickly when you go door knocking as a rookie candidate member of Parliament, people don't actually have opinions on a lot of issues. People who buy political memberships do, people who are involved in politics do, but the average Canadian voter doesn't think about all the issues. What they want from you as a leader is someone who stands for something, who's willing to express an opinion, and who has a reason for why this is best for the country. And you know, People get frustrated, granted they vote for the Liberals all the time, you see this more in Ontario than out here, and the weather vane type of politician is very popular. And again, some of my friends unfortunately began to fall into that category. And so some of the people who had approached me before began to approach me again, and they said, you have been consistent. When you believe in something, you argue for it. You respect people who disagree. When you lose a debate, you can move on. But you stand for something and you're consistent. You should run and you should get in there to stand for the consistent principles that the party has held for the last 10, 12, was about 13 years since we've been one unified party. Because those are the things that actually got us elected. Some of you may remember back in 2005, right before we went in the election which brought down the Liberals, Stephen Harper gave a speech in Ottawa to a conservative think tank. And he didn't back down from his principles. He doubled down on them. We won that election. 2015, when we're out door knocking, having to answer questions about a certain Senator Duffy for 2 weeks of the campaign, we lost. And this is one thing I will never understand. Why good, solid conservatives will ever walk away from their principles. Principles matter. That's what leadership is about. Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, many people have taught us that in the past. And we keep forgetting that lesson. So what are the sort of principles, what is the general philosophy that a Brad Trost brings? Where is he? What does he stand for? Where is he going to go? Well, I put my broad philosophy, I organize it into 3 basic categories, all of which I believe are interlinked. They come one to another. They're there to support one another. And I talk about this, and first of all, people understand where I come from. This is sometimes the only thing people think I am, but they know I'm socially conservative. And they understand that I actually put the value of family underneath everything that we do. Because family is the fundamental building block of society. You don't see that when the Liberals go out there arguing for something. Look, one of the reasons I'm opposing the legalization of marijuana is because it will very much make it more difficult for parents to control the substance to get it to their children. It destroys the family when you have drug addictions in your society. One of the reasons I've been so adamant in supporting the traditional definition of the family is because we need to promote mums and dads as something better than any other arrangement, 2 people, he's and she's, committed to each other in lifelong union. That's how we actually build our society. It's something that has not only social value, it has economic value. You go out there and you go to certain portions of North America, the rural reserves in Western Canada, the inner cities of the United States, and you see where the family has broken down. It is an absolute chaos to the economy of it. So you don't have to be a church-going, sort of Bible-thumping person to understand just what this has meant. Every culture throughout the whole world has understood that this is fundamental to society. And I realize that we may not be able to get certain legislation through, but we should stand for certain principles, because as we draw a line in the sand, they help us to deal with issues that go forward. So I'm a social conservative, one that actually believes this can bring people into the party. The old line about you get more with honey than vinegar is true. So when I talk about my pro-life convictions, I am adamant about them. I say let's do things like make Canada the most pro-adoption country in the world. It's a great thing to do. Let's go there and educate our fellow Canadian citizens on the value of Down syndrome children. Their parents are often told, go ahead, abort, this child is not worth something. I was talking about this in one of my campaign things about why things like that matter. And I met a mother who said to me, my little boy has Down syndrome, not enough Canadians value. And when we get out there and we put that in our conservative message, people actually understand we're compassionate conservatives, we care about things. If we're going to fight things like euthanasia, let's talk about how we can expand palliative care for our elderly, which is a disgrace in this country. But I'm not only a social conservative. People, when they know me, that's the first thing they think about. I'm also an unapologetic, unrelenting fiscal conservative. Because you have to remember, a government that's big enough to give you everything you want is big enough to take everything away. This is something that needs to be understood. Nothing is free when you get it from the government. You pay for it, and you often pay for it in more ways than you know how. So we have to actually be disciplined and eliminate things from the government expenditure that are not necessary. We spend $1 billion a year on the CBC every year, and they spend their time mostly attacking conservatives. Big C conservatives, small C conservatives, they don't really care. And what I don't get is in this whole leadership campaign, only one of the other candidates is with me on scrapping them. And we know the majority of rank and file, card-carrying conservatives in this country really don't like their tax dollars going to them. The CBC will exist as a private entity. It will have what it has. But we as fiscal conservatives need to get serious about cutting things out like that we don't need because it costs the taxpayers money. There's billions of dollars. I'm not a big fan of corporate subsidies. They need to go. I think there's things that we need to do and look at expenditures. Again, you want to ask a social conservative where to cut? $650 million of overseas abortion funding. You want to talk to someone here in Alberta who's lost their job in the oil and gas because of the extra pressure of carbon taxes? You ask them, do you think $2.5 billion of your tax dollars should go for overseas climate change programs? The answer is no. So, we need to cut income taxes so that every single Canadian can have a tax cut. Because this is one thing that needs to be understood. Tax cuts aren't just for the rich, they're for all Canadians because we all pay one way or the other. We don't need a carbon tax in any way, shape, or form. Okay? As I was mentioning earlier, I was a little kid in Calgary when the last Trudeau brought in the National Energy Program. We don't need to shut down Western Canada, which pays for the bills in this country for many years. And that's what this whole idea is. Last time the NEP was to put a thumb on the West, the carbon tax is the exact same thing. No ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. That means I am opposed to all this regulation to the back doors, to anything like that. That just hurts our economy. So as a fiscal conservative, we need to eliminate things because not only does it bring extra freedom and prosperity, the two go hand in hand. You cannot separate the two. You look at our society, Canada is one of the oldest democratic countries in the world. Why have we been successful? Because we've been one of the freest countries in the world. That's also why we've been one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And finally, I'm a democratic conservative. I do understand, as much as I hold to all of the views I have, very emphatically, I cannot get every member of the Conservative Party and every Canadian on side with me on everything. So I have to allow some flexibility, but I'm going to try to win you over. If you disagree with me, I'm going to do things to try to convince you. I'm going to show different ways, and we're going to bring this over. In the Conservative Party, you tended to have gotten asked for one thing over and over again if you've been a long-term member. Money. Not your opinion, not your vote, but for donations. And if we're a party that's supposed to be democratic and representative and understand where our membership is, we need to have internal referendums, internal plebiscites, as if you were, to have views on things. I'll give an example fairly recently. Some of you have heard of this M103 motion, the Islamophobia motion. All but two Conservative MPs who were in the House that day voted against it. Okay, there's just two of them. What you don't know is it took a little bit of nudging on certain elements of our leadership. Not our critic, he was great on this, but some of our leadership was really scared to be politically incorrect on this. Our membership had no such doubts. Our membership knew something when they saw it. They called a spade, and they had no doubt. We talked to the party memberships throughout the country. Everyone said, yeah, this is one of those scams being done by those groups that are sort of sympathetic to the Islamic Brotherhood, and they're going ahead with it. You guys should oppose it. But again, when you get to Ottawa and you live in the bubble, you kind of want to be on both sides of the fence. So it took a little while to get everyone on side and realize that we as a party should fight it. And that's one of the things that I've always found most amazing. When you actually go back and forth and have regular communication with the members for more than just money, you get more and you get ahead. candidate selection, a lot of other things across the country, strategy. It was all coming from Ottawa, and that caused problems for us as a party. English language is something interesting. Our prime minister is a minister, someone to serve. You know, under the English Westminster system, we talk about first among equals. France today had an election. They're having a president. Other countries have different titles. We don't have a first dictator. We don't have a first president. We have a first minister, a prime minister. Because under the Westminster style of government, it's supposed to be first among equals. The government is the cabinet supported by the governing party, and they go back and forth in a relationship. That's how it works best. And an understanding that if you're going to get your goals, you don't get them by force. You get them by bringing people alongside. And those are sort of the intertwined principles that I believe are necessary. If I'm going to be successful as a social conservative, I need to convince people that I'm right. If I'm going to be successful as a fiscal conservative, I need to be able to convince people I'm right. Why? Because it all goes back to those basic democratic principles. The rule of law, representative and responsible government, the things that Canada was built on. So those are my basic principles. You're all going to have all sorts of questions about specific policies. What does he think on taxes, immigration, you name it. You're going to have questions, feel free to ask about anything whatsoever. Biography, there's the joke in this race, I'm the Asian candidate in the race. It doesn't look that way, but why are people saying that? And people ask, what are appropriate questions to ask at events like this? Well, I had the same experience when I was in front of a grade 5 class in my Saskatoon riding. The teacher had gotten everyone all ready, all the little grade 5ers, and they were supposed to all know to ask what appropriate questions. They'd been studying social studies, they knew what the premier was, they knew what the mayor was, now they were reading their member of parliament. So they shoot up their little hands. There was a little boy on the front row, and I pointed to him. And his important question was, Mister, what's your salary? Poor teacher, her face turns totally red. She tries to give a little explanation. They know better and all that. So all of her little charges, they listen, they all nod their head. Yes, we know what questions it has to be related to what we studied and what we talked about in class. So then I point to a little girl. She had her hands up. And her question was, are you married? So if you think the question's important, I will answer it. And the little guy at the time, he was very disappointed that I didn't make as much as an NHL hockey player. So politics was off his career agenda. And at the time I wasn't married, but I solved that problem 4.5 years ago. So anyways, I'll take any questions now, and I don't know if we need a microphone for the cameras, but we'll figure out something here a little bit. So feel free, everything's on the table, my resume, my background. This is politics. If a politician can't answer the question, something's wrong. So go for it. And I was given actually a list of questions, and I forget who was it that has it. If they want to throw some of those questions in when we've got a pause, I can do that, because I know there was someone who had 6 or 7 or 8 earlier. So anyone want to go first? You've got, okay.
What would you do for returning the Conservative Party to the correct definition of marriage?
The question is, what would I do to turn the Conservative Party to the correct definition of marriage? First of all, what I would do is I would start to bring in some policies that actually have impact on the day-to-day lives. Because one of the reasons I was adamantly opposed to the change in the first place was it was a line in the sand. Enough of a political realist to know that there was unlikely to be a vote coming anytime soon, maybe ever. But you draw the line in the sand with the policy, because once you have that policy, it allows you to protect on a whole lot of other things. So let me give some very practical things why I believe people who hold to the traditional definition of marriage are being discriminated against in our society. I'll give some examples, and then why I actually think conscience legislation stating that that is one of the reasons you can't be discriminated against, okay? So that would be one thing I would do. Second thing, and then, so let me run through those examples, and then I'll deal with it a little further. So, civil servant gave me this example. She has to go to LGBTQ sensitivity training, okay? Sign off that she agrees. She says, look, I go to a Christian church, I have nothing against anyone, I don't demonstrate, I don't do anything, but I believe all sex outside of traditional marriage is wrong. And now I have to sign off on things at work or I'll lose my job. Okay? Frankly, I think he's being discriminated against. He has to figure out a way to fudge her convictions or lose her job. Federal civil servant. School students across the country. Alberta, I think, is included in this. I know for sure Ontario. They're taught in class homosexual sex is right. Now, if you as a parent believe that, teach that to your kids. Okay? If you as a parent don't believe that's right, you don't want that taught to your kids. You should have the right to do it. My view is whatever. So in situations like that, we need to have conscience legislation put back into the legislation. Whereas as a Conservative Party, if we had just had that principle that traditional marriage is correct, it would have been implied that those things needed to be protected. So I would argue for conscience protection legislation for situations like the two I've mentioned. The Trinity Western Law School case could also be brought up as an institution. What I think is the best way of doing it, rather than going for a direct confrontational fight, is starting to bring in measures which say traditional historic marriage is the absolute thing that we as a society support the most. Okay? So in some respect, it's the reverse. Instead of bringing everyone down to the same level or everyone up, you start to push this higher. Now, that would actually imply saying that it has more value than common law marriage. Okay, which is in Quebec is the majority right now. I think they use a different term there. So I would begin to look at things that say, in the policy, our government policy is to create strong, stable, traditional marriages. Why? Because of all the obvious social benefits for children. Because as much as you see the odd adoption case between homosexual couples, 99.99% of children are still brought up in a traditional situation. And you want to have the most stability possible to encourage that. Divorce happens. I've got family members who are divorced. Everyone knows we've got single parent I've had on my staff, etc. over the years. But whatever we can do to promote the traditional family saves us economically, saves us socially, and so forth. So I would start, rather than a direct head-to-head fight, I would start by saying, let's start to promote the historic definition and start to give a little more privileges in law and policy to stable, committed, legal, binding couples who have children.
Would you as leader impose a policy on the party?
What I would do at this point is this. I think it would be worthwhile for us to have another vote at convention because there was a lot of irregularities going on. I wasn't the only one who protested to Rona about this beforehand. There was dispute. 3 members of the National Policy Committee said that it was illegitimate to bring it to the floor. Saskatchewan and Prince Edward Island, in the rather aggressive debate around this, had their policy members blocked from voting and said that they were illegitimate to vote. Both of them were opposed to it. So one of the things that people need to understand about what happened in Vancouver was it wasn't totally kosher by the book as far as the rules. And so I think it would be worthwhile for the party to have another vote on it. We'll see where it is, and at that point we'll see where the membership will take it. But this is the irony. When you had a situation where the conventions all across the country voted it down, not everywhere, some places passed it. And there was a law firm in Toronto that was paying for people to come vote on it. Let's just put it this way, the rules were bent. And it's not just me that's saying it. I got 3 members of the National Policy Committee who are backing me up on this, including my own national councillor in Saskatchewan. So these are people who are party brass who are saying this. So. Okay, I'll go here and then to the gentleman over there.
What do you think religious activity after that? Not to work, not to touch school.
About banning religion from the public sphere?
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm very strongly for religious freedom. Now, There's some practicalities, as we've said with the kneecap, on things like citizenship ceremonies. And I've actually worked a citizenship ceremony where the lady had a kneecap. So I actually supported the party's policy quite strongly that you should remove your face for the citizenship ceremony, because when you take an oath for citizenship, you are saying openly to overall all Canadians that you have nothing to hide. A face covering is a version of hiding. So in practical situations like that, I think that it's very important that we do things like that, because there's a reason by that. If, however, you're saying want to get rid of things like the Catholic school system, or you have independent schools, okay, I'm not following what you're saying then.
Actually, this is a question from a friend. He asked actually two questions. One is, for example, doctor. If he has certain religious beliefs, he will ask him to forbid him to do certain things. Will he not do it if he is on his job?
I'll give an example. I believe in conscience legislation. So if you ask a doctor who believes in the sanctity of life to say commit an abortion or engage in euthanasia, I think not only for religious purposes, but if you're someone who has other moral objections, because some people just have ethical codes, I do think there should be conscience clauses to allow people to follow their conscience. And euthanasia has been a perfect example, because it's not just traditional people for religious reasons, staunch Roman Catholics, evangelical Protestants. Even doctors who have no religious beliefs whatsoever have been saying, I as a doctor, because of my moral beliefs, need a conscience clause protection because I can't participate in this. So for things like that, I'm very much a strong protector of people's consciences. And again, the example I gave with sex ed in schools, I think parents should be allowed to object to their children being taught things that they feel are not appropriate for their age or for moral reasons. I don't think they even need to really give a reason for it. So for things like that, I very strongly support protecting parents' rights, physicians' rights, whatever is in that circumstance.
Actually, this, can I ask second?
Keep going on this one.
The second question is actually the actual example in this. For example, one in Hill School District, Ontario,
Okay.
and they are allowed certain religious group to pray in the school ground, which is public school. I'm totally against it. This is number one. Second, Weber Academy in Calgary
Okay.
is a fine $26,000 because they do not allow the student to pray in school. And also they ask for certain space,
Okay.
particular space.
Let me just ask this question here. I can pretty much guess which the religion is this. I will say, I find this sort of ironic. The same people who spent years going to the courts to try to stop people from saying the Lord's Prayer are now going back to the courts so people can do other sorts of prayers. Okay, that's part of the history of ironicness. Look, when it comes to dealing with children, my first advice is always give children the utmost latitude. Okay, you're thinking Muslims, I'm thinking Jehovah's Witnesses who don't want to participate in Christmas or something like that. I wouldn't use, now this is a provincial matter, but I wouldn't turn whole rooms of my school over. If they need to do that during lunch break or something like that, they should try to find some other place to do it, would be my suggestion. I don't see why you need to have complete everything changed around for everyone else.
The reality is when you have a school trustee supported, you have a human rights panel supported, you cannot fight it. With education minister or Ontario also supported, people just have no way to fight it. I wonder, what do you think? How do you fight it?
Well, you elect different school trustees is what you do. So, no, it's an irony because I will say this, I don't think there's so much being given those rights because they're religious rights. I know it's going to sound funny, but a large argument of what the human rights industry often does is they view it as multicultural rights, and they do it in opposition to the historic society that's been here. So it's as I was saying, the same people who are saying you have to give people Muslim prayer rooms are also saying you can't pass out Gideon Bibles in the school system. So my viewpoint is this, do something like that. If you're going to do it, Let them do it during their lunch hour when there's children, their parents can come in or guardians or whatever, and they can go do their prayers. Try to give everyone the parental rights to do whatsoever. Because if someone wants to come into the school and pass out religious books, hey, I'm a Christian, I got no problem with that, but you need to have the parents' permission to do it. So my viewpoint is this. No, they shouldn't be turning in the schools into mosques. That's inappropriate. Just as you shouldn't turn schools into churches, unless it's sort of a Roman Catholic school, which is naturally together with the Roman Catholic Church. Okay. Okay, and you were next, and then the gentleman over there, I think, was next, and then we'll start working here.
My question's going to be around how do you educate the Canadian public? And I'm going to do it one.
The question is, how do you educate the Canadian public? I'm just doing this for everyone else's purpose.
It's going to be one premise and one experience. So you've heard the saying that a democracy is two wolves and a cow voting on who's for lunch.
The cow tends to be Alberta.
And the cow is producing milk. And so how do you get people to understand that? And I'm going to cite a case. I lived in Peru when they underwent 22,000% inflation. The entire economy failed. The politicians were on TV explaining sound money, the total amount you have for what is available to do with it, and the country started talking about that. I don't hear that in Canada. I just hear Trudeau arguing he's one of the two wolves that's going to send $20 for every man, woman, and child for abortions overseas because Trump cut it. How do you educate the Canadian public? Understand sound money and
The question is, how do you educate the Canadian public? And the illustration the gentleman was using, he lived in Peru when they had hyperinflation, and the politicians, some of them went out there and began to actually do an explanation of what is sound money. Let me answer this one by saying, I think that's more than just the leader of the party can do. I think this is something broader societal influences need to be involved in, including the entirety of the political parties. I do think it doesn't hurt to have a political leader who sits down and explains things in detail, not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. FDR, way back before I was born, used to have these, what did they call them? Fireside chats, when you would on the radio all over the United States talk to people. Now, you didn't have the 1,000-channel universe and YouTube and everything to compete with, so he had a huge audience. But I remember when I read about that, I thought, the guy got a chance to teach people in his own perspective. Now, I'm not a fan of the New Deal or anything like that, but I understand very much what he did. I would say this, though. I think it's not always a matter of head facts. Sometimes it's also a matter of character. I was talking with one of my supporters this day, and we were talking in Edmonton, and we were talking immigration policy. And he was saying, you know, a lot of people in my community don't care what the best policy is for the country. They just want to know what's good for them personally. Okay? That's not a question of intellectual. They know what is best for the country, but it doesn't always meet their needs. And you'll see that sometimes dealing with people. They know it's a bad policy for the country, but they get the handout for themselves. So it's a mixture of not just intellectual understanding, but also moral character. And I think it's broader society more than just one political leader that will do it. But I think you have to be prepared to defend whatever your values are and to be principle-based in your politics. You watch politicians who aren't principle-based, they can't go and say, this is why we're doing something, it's principled. What they'll say is, well, I represent the wolves, so here's what we're going to do. And so if you go back to a more principle-based, the Trumpist-type politicians, you have an easier time explaining that. Look, I've listened to Michael Chong give what I think are ridiculous answers on the carbon tax, but he sits down and he makes his case. And he does that honestly, and people appreciate that. I think you need to do that on the other side too, rather than just say, here's the policy, you're going to win for it. Here's the policy, this is why it works, is important as well. So I don't know if I got a perfect answer for that one, but that one we'll try. Okay, now we're coming this way. We'll go right there, yeah.
So this is the
follow-up question to the gentleman over there about conscience-based medicine. And I understand what you were saying about Down syndrome, abortion, euthanasia. We've heard recently in Detroit that there's a couple physicians who have been involved in female circumcision. That is conscience-based for them.
Yeah.
How would you maneuver that?
Well, look, it's the old line about we believe in free speech, but that doesn't mean you can holler fire in a crowded movie theater, okay? I believe in religious freedom, but my understanding from reading the history of the Americas, part of the religious practice in South America at one time, Latin America, Central America at one time involved human sacrifice, okay? So there's limits. Look, what they're doing there, and the courts have various tests for this, and this has been done before, they are committing harm and violating some other people, okay? Now, if those young girls were adult women, they wanted this done to them, 18 or older, age of majority, I think they're absolutely crazy, but then they could give that permission, which of course they wouldn't do. But you can't give people the right to assault people under the guise of religious freedom. I mean, I'm watching the Charter of Rights decision about polygamy in British Columbia there, okay? I don't think that that's a religious freedom question there, but that's why you have specific tests.
But it's a parental choice, like homeschooling.
Oh yeah, and I was a homeschool too. So I understand that, but it could also be a parental choice to have your kid run across Deerfoot Trail there. There's a little bit different there because they're committing a fundamental underlying criminal act. Not having your child opt out of a sex ed class, there's no underlying criminal act by not going to a sex ed class. There is an underlying criminal act when you commit an assault on someone that has permanent repercussions. So there would be differences on that. So
there is a way to legislate.
Oh yeah, that would not be difficult. Look, the policies I've proposed under conscience legislation, I've run them past a friend of mine who teaches law at the University of Saskatchewan. Constitutional law is one of the things he does. And so I've made sure that these things could be done legislatively. He's recommended that when you do script these things, a parental bill of rights or something, you be fairly direct as to what it covers, rather than just putting some broad overarching principles, because the broad overarching principles then you get into much more difficulty with legal interpretation. So be a bit more prescriptive and a bit more direct. You may miss some things, but your legislation is more likely to stand up in the courts, particularly when you get into jurisdictional issues. Okay, I think we're going to go there, we're going to go there, and we're going to go there, and then I forgot who's next. Oh, sorry.
Could you please comment on the motion 103, ordinance and how it's going to be fought? Because that is the first step. Well, it's a construct of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's the first step of introducing Sharia law, loss of freedom of speech, religion, association, and everything else that you want for your children and grandchildren.
So the question was, could I comment on M103 and the rolling forward implications of this? For those of you who, I think, is everyone aware what M103 was? Do I have to explain it? No, okay. And everyone knows what M103 is. That was the Islamophobia motion in the House of Commons. It was brought forward because the NDP had put together a petition with some of their friends and presented to the House, basically saying the same thing as the motion. So the Liberals decided they had to do one better. Now, the petition was originally introduced in the House of Commons by the NDP. It was objected to by some Conservative MPs and then later passed when those MPs happened to be gone. Deals get done in the House of Commons this way. And some of us MPs, we found out about this later on in our ridings. Again, it's back to that democratic conservative principle. So M103 was brought in, it passed the House of Commons, but that doesn't mean it has force of law yet. The motion when it passed the House of Commons said that in 240 days, a parliamentary committee would have to report back with recommendations as far as what would be done, and I forget the exact terms, to fight racism, Islamophobia, all those politically correct terms that we historically, they sometimes mean something and they sometimes don't. So that was all put together. So at this point, we don't know what that committee is going to do. In fact, it's even possible they don't put that committee forward because, frankly, the Liberals took a political beating on this one. If you look at the polling data, if you look at people's responses. If they do actually bring forth that committee and start to do hearings on that, I encourage those of you who, like me, are strongly opposed to it, to start to make some noise about it. Now here in Calgary, you've got a couple Liberal MPs. All the Conservative MPs in Calgary opposed the motion here, but begin to make some noise about it at that point, because you want to stop it as soon as you can, because they will have witnesses, they will have testimony, they'll have written submissions, and you want to push back and say what some of the problems on this could be. If it does get through the report stage at that point, then the Liberals will have to decide, do they want to bring a piece of legislation on that? I'm hopeful that if we make enough noise, they will see the light of day and back off at this point. Because let me give you some real life examples of what this could actually cause problems for, okay? Because people talk about this in the abstract. I have a friend, acquaintance, who is an Iranian Protestant pastor. He grew up in Iran, came to Canada here,